Warning: this story contains extreme violence, slasher elements, and murder. I encourage you to listen to the entire story, and if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and press the bell icon to stay updated. I'd spent years chasing shadows, digging into the darkest corners of humanity, but nothing could prepare me for what I found in that forsaken town. My career had been built on exposing the grotesque, the horrifying, the unthinkable, yet, when I received the tip about the disappearances in the isolated town of Hollow's End, I could never have anticipated the abyss I was about to stare into. The town was nestled deep in the forest, an encroaching darkness that seemed to swallow the sky. The moment I arrived, a chill permeated the air, not from the cold but from something far more sinister. The locals, a sullen and enigmatic bunch, spoke in hushed tones about an ancient ritual, a pact with something unspeakable that lurked beyond their town's borders. They spoke as if their very lives hinged on appeasing this entity, and as I listened, the hairs on my neck stood erect. The deeper I delved, the more I unearthed, a twisted history of human sacrifices and secret underground chambers, where the echoes of tortured souls seemed to reverberate through the earth itself. Each discovery only led to darker revelations, a maddening spiral that pulled me further into the heart of their nightmare. I stumbled upon a hidden chamber beneath an old church, its walls etched with cryptic symbols and the remnants of rituals long forgotten by the outside world. The town's residents, or rather, the cult that controlled it, were determined to keep their secrets buried. Their eyes held a feverish desperation, and their words hinted at a horrifying truth: the only way out of Hollow's End was to become a part of the horror, or be consumed by it. Every step I took was shadowed by the sensation of being watched, of something ancient and malevolent that lingered just out of sight. As I pieced together the fragments of the town's dark history, it became clear that the line between as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe along the damp stone. I could barely breathe, the stench of decaying flesh assaulting my senses, mingling with something else, something metallic. Blood. The walls were covered in smeared, half-faded symbols, ancient and foreboding, carved deep into the stone. They pulsed with an energy that made my skin crawl, like the heartbeat of something monstrous lying just beneath the surface. And then there were the bones, piles of them, scattered across the floor. Human bones, cracked open, marrow sucked dry. My instincts screamed at me to run. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the center of the room. A stone altar stood there, slick with what could only be blood. Fresh blood. And above it, hanging from rusted chains, was a body. A man, no, what was left of him. His skin had been flayed, muscle and sinew exposed, blood still dripping from his mutilated form. His eyes, though lifeless, seemed to be locked onto mine, as if warning me of what was to come. I wanted to vomit, but I swallowed the bile that rose in my throat. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to approach the altar. There was something there, something that compelled me to look closer. A journal lay beside the mutilated body, its leather cover stained with dark, crusted blood. I picked it up with trembling hands, flipping through pages of frantic scribbles, the handwriting growing more erratic as it progressed. It belonged to a man named Father Sullivan, the town's priest, or at least, that's what he had once been. The entries detailed his descent into madness, his attempts to stop the ritual, and his ultimate failure. His last entry sent a shiver down my spine: the ritual demands a sacrifice, blood for blood. The entity grows hungrier with each tried to stop it, but the cult. They know. They always know. And now, they've chosen me. God help me, they've chosen me. I can hear them coming. I can hear it coming. A low growl echoed through the chamber, and I spun around, my heart in my throat. The sound wasn't human. It was guttural, primal, like the growl of a beast that had no business existing in our world. I backed away, my flashlight catching a glimpse of movement in the darkness. Shadows twisted and danced, coalescing into a form that was both there and not there, and then I saw it. A creature that defied logic, its body a grotesque amalgamation of twisted limbs and gaping maws, each one filled with rows of jagged teeth. It moved with a sickening fluidity, its skin a sickly, mottled gray, oozing with a black substance that seemed to suck the light from the room. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow voids, endless pits of darkness that seemed to stare into my very soul. I stumbled back, tripping over the bones, my mind reeling with terror. This was the entity, the thing the town had been feeding for centuries. The thing that demanded blood. It let out a screech, a sound so piercing it felt like knives slicing through my eardrums, and began to advance. I ran. I had no plan, no sense of direction, only the primal need to survive. My footsteps echoed through the dark corridors as I fled. The creature's guttural growls and the wet slap of its deformed limbs following close behind. The tunnel twisted and turned, disorienting me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I burst out of the underground passage into the cool night air, the town's eerie silence greeting me like a tomb. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, but there was no relief. The shadows seemed to lengthen, crawling across the ground towards me. I knew I wasn't safe, not even in the open. The town was empty, or so it seemed. But the roads, the paths I had come in on, they were gone. The forest had closed in, the trees standing like sentinels, barring my escape, and then, I saw them. The townsfolk, standing in a circle around the church, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. They chanted in a language that sent shivers down my spine, their voices low and droning, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my head spin. In their hands, they held knives, long, curved blades that gleamed in the dim light. I realized with dawning horror that they weren't just chanting. They were calling it, summoning the entity to them. To me, I tried to scream. But my voice caught in my throat. My legs refused to move as the cult members turned their heads in unison, their dead eyes locking onto me. They stepped forward, slowly, methodically, closing in like predators. I was their prey. The entity's growls grew louder, echoing through the trees, vibrating in my bones. The cultists' chants rose in volume, becoming a deafening cacophony, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. I was surrounded, no way out, no escape. And then I felt it, a cold, slimy hand closing around my ankle. I looked down to see a rotting corpse clawing its way out of the earth, its dead eyes staring up at me with a hunger that mirrored the entity's. Another hand grabbed my arm. Then another, until I was being dragged down, pulled into the ground by a horde of the dead. Their touch was freezing, burning like dry ice against my skin, their fingers digging into my flesh, tearing it away as I struggled in vain. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the entity, towering over the cultists, its maw wide open, ready to feed. And in that final moment, as the earth swallowed me whole, I realized the truth. There was no escape from Hollow's End. That, held tight by something cold and slimy. Panic seized me as I realized I was buried alive. I could hear the shifting of soil above me, the weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. My mouth was filled with dirt, the gritty taste of earth choking me as I tried to scream. I thrashed against the restraints, my fingers scraping against splintered wood. A coffin. They had put me in a coffin and buried me alive. My heart pounded in my ears, the sound of my own blood rushing filling the void. But there was something else, another sound. Faint but unmistakable. Scratching. It was coming from inside the coffin with me. I froze, terror gripping me as I realized I wasn't alone. Something was in here with me, something that moved in the darkness, brushing against my skin with a touch as cold as death. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The corpse that had dragged me down, had it followed me into the grave? The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was in here with me was trying to claw its way out. My breathing became ragged, each inhalation a struggle as the air grew thinner. I had to get out, had to escape before I suffocated, or whatever was in here with me did something far worse. I reached up, my hands trembling as I pushed against the coffin lid. It wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, using every ounce of strength I had left, and felt the wood give slightly. Encouraged, I pushed again, harder this time, and the lid creaked open just a crack. Fresh air seeped in, mingling with the scent of decayed flesh. But before I could pry the lid open further, a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing my wrist with a grip like iron. I gasped, trying to pull away, but it was too strong. The hand was skeletal, the skin rotted away to reveal bone as I kicked at the lid with all my might. The wood splintered under my boots, and I felt the coffin crack open. Dirt poured in, cascading over my face, filling the coffin with a suffocating avalanche. I choked, spitting out clods of earth as I clawed my way upward, kicking and screaming as the skeletal hand clung to me, trying to pull me back down. Finally, with a desperate shove, I broke through the surface. My head emerged from the ground, gasping for air as I dragged myself out of the grave. The cold night air hit me like a shock, and I collapsed on the ground, coughing up dirt, my body trembling with exhaustion and terror. But I wasn't safe. Not yet. I could feel it, a presence, lurking in the darkness, watching me. I looked around, my vision blurry, but I saw nothing. The town was eerily quiet, the only sound my own ragged breathing. But I knew it was there. The entity. The cultists. They were waiting for me. I forced myself to stand, my legs weak and unsteady. I had to get out of here, had to find a way to escape this nightmare. But as I stumbled forward, something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the graveyard, half hidden in the shadows. It was a woman, her long black hair hanging in matted strands over her face, her clothes tattered and stained with blood. Her eyes, hollow and vacant, locked onto mine. She moved toward me with a slow, jerky gait, her body twisted and broken, as if every bone had been shattered and put back together wrong. That I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of what I was seeing. She reached out to me with a hand that was nothing but bone, her fingers brushing against my cheek with an icy touch that sent a shiver down my spine. Then, she spoke, her voice a guttural whisper that seemed to come from the very dream at me to run, but my body refused to obey. I was trapped in her gaze, unable to look away as her face twisted into a grotesque grin, her teeth rotting and blackened. She leaned in closer, her breath hot and putrid against my skin, as she whispered the terrible truth. "You can't leave," she hissed. "The town won't let you. It needs you." I snapped out of my paralysis, stumbling backward, away from her. But she followed, her steps slow and deliberate, each one echoing with a sickening crunch of broken bones. She was relentless, her empty eyes locked onto mine, and I realized with dawning horror that she wasn't going to stop until she had me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to escape. I could hear her behind me, the rustling of her tattered clothes, the dragging of her twisted limbs as she pursued me through the graveyard. I didn't dare look back. I knew that if I did, I would be lost. I burst through the cemetery gates and into the town, the streets dark and empty. The houses loomed like silent sentinels, their windows black and lifeless. I could feel them watching me, feel the town itself closing in around me, as if it were alive, a living entity that thrived on the fear and despair of those trapped within it. the woman's voice echoed in my head, growing louder, more insistent, as if it were coming from inside me. "Join us. Join us." My footsteps echoed off the cobblestone streets as I ran, but no matter how fast I went, the town stretched out before me, endless and unchanging. The same houses, the same streets, over and over, as if I were trapped in a labyrinth with no way out, and then, I saw it, the church, the place where it had all begun. The doors were wide open, beckoning me inside. I knew it was a trap, knew that if I entered, there would be no coming back. But as I crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash, plunging me into darkness. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something that made my skin crawl. I wasn't alone. I could hear them, footsteps, whispering voices, the rustling of robes as the cultists emerged from the shadows. They surrounded me, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. In their hands, they held their ritual knives, the blades glinting with a cold, metallic sheen. One of them stepped forward, pulling back his hood to reveal a face I recognized, Father Sullivan. Or what was left of him. His skin was gray, decomposing, his eyes sunken and hollow. But there was a twisted satisfaction in his expression as he spoke. "The town demands its due," he intoned, his voice a dry rasp. "You will become one with the Devourer. Your blood will feed the entity, and you will join the others in eternal servitude." The cultists closed in, their knives raised, and I knew there was no escape. But then, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The entity was coming, called by the blood that was about to be spilled. The air vibrated with its presence, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. Suddenly, the floor split open, a gaping chasm tearing through the center of the church. The cultists recoiled in fear, but it was too late. From the depths of the chasm, the entity emerged, a mass of writhing, tentacled limbs, eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, and a maw that opened wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The cultists screamed, but their cries were cut short as the entity descended upon them, devouring them one by one. Blood sprayable. The smell of blood and death filled the air, thick and suffocating, as the church was bathed in gore. I should have run, should have tried to escape, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the carnage, and then, the entity turned its gaze on me. I felt its mind, ancient and vast, probing my thoughts, my memories. It knew everything about me, every fear, every sin, every dark secret I had ever harbored. It saw me, truly saw me, and in that moment, I realized the terrible truth. I was not an outsider, not just another victim. I had been chosen by the town, by the entity itself. My coming here had not been a coincidence. It had been a summons, a call that I had unwittingly answered. The town had claimed me long before I had ever set foot in it, and now, there was only one thing left for me to do. The entity loomed before me, a monstrous mass of writhing flesh and eyes, its presence overwhelming, its hunger insatiable. As it stared into me, I felt my thoughts unraveling, my sanity slipping away like sand through my fingers. Every instinct screamed for me to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there, yet I was frozen in place, paralyzed by its gaze. It knew me, every dark thought, every twisted desire I'd ever had. It fed on fear, on suffering, and now it was ready to devour me. I could feel its thoughts slithering into my mind, probing the deepest recesses of my soul. It didn't want just my flesh, it wanted everything, my very essence, to become one with it, to be consumed and twisted into something monstrous. But then, something flickered in the back of my mind, a memory, a flash of the journal I had found in the underground chamber, Father Sullivan's desperate scribblings. The priest had tried to stop the ritual, tried to sever the town's connection to the entity. He had failed, but perhaps the entity and bolted. I had no plan, no idea where I was going, but I had to move, had to survive, if only for a little while longer. The entity let out a deafening screech, the sound reverberating through the church, shaking the walls as it lashed out with its tentacles, smashing through pews and tearing apart the stone floor. I ran blindly through the church, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath ragged. The cultists were gone, their blood staining the floor, their bodies reduced to unrecognizable pulp. The doors were still shut, trapping me inside with the nightmare that had consumed them, but there had to be another way out. There had to be. I spotted a small door behind the altar, partially hidden by the shadows. Without thinking, I sprinted toward it, throwing it open just as a tentacle smashed into the altar, sending splinters of wood flying through the air. I ducked through the doorway, slamming it shut behind me as I descended into darkness. The air was damp and cold, the smell of earth and decay filling my nostrils. I was in another underground passage, the walls narrow and claustrophobic, pressing in on me from all sides. I could hear the entity behind me, its screeches muffled by the thick stone, but I knew it wouldn't be long before it found me again. I had to move. I had to find a way to end this. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the earth, the oppressive weight of the town above pressing down on me. I could feel the ground vibrating beneath my feet, the entity's presence growing stronger, more pervasive. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the air, in my mind. I stumbled through the darkness, my hands scraping against the rough stone walls as I tried to find my way. My flashlight had died, leaving me blind, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the narrow tunnel. But then, I heard something else. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, guiding me deeper into the tunnel. And then, I saw it, a faint, flickering light at the end of the passage, like a beacon in the darkness. I ran toward it, desperate, my legs burning with exhaustion, my lungs screaming for air. The light grew brighter as I neared, and soon I found myself standing before a massive iron door, ancient and covered in rust, the symbols etched into it glowing faintly with a sickly green light. The whispers were louder now, coming from behind the door, a cacophony of voices overlapping, speaking in a language I couldn't understand but somehow knew was older than time itself. This was it. This was the heart of the town, the source of its power, the place where the entity had been bound and fed for centuries. And now, it was trying to escape, trying to break free and consume everything. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door. The chamber beyond was vast, impossibly large, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with rows of skulls, their empty eye sockets staring down at me, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of blackened, congealed blood. In the center of the room stood an altar, similar to the one in the church above, but much larger, its surface carved with intricate runes that pulsed with an eerie, green light. And there, lying on the altar, was a book, massive, bound in human skin, its pages filled with symbols that writhed and twisted as if alive. The whispers were coming from the book, 1,000 voices speaking as one, urging me forward, beckoning me to open it. This was the source of the town's curse, the key to its destruction. But as I approached the altar, the entity's presence grew stronger, more oppressive, filling the chamber with a tangible sense of dread. I could feel it in the air, the vibrations of it, and I heard the stone walls cracking as the entity bore down on me. It was coming, and it would stop at nothing to protect the book, to keep its power intact. I had to act quickly. With a cry of desperation, I grabbed the book and flung it open. The pages screamed as they turned, the symbols burning into my mind, searing my flesh with their otherworldly energy. The voices grew louder, a deafening roar that filled my head, threatening to tear my soul apart. But I kept going, forcing myself to read the words, to speak the incantations written in blood, even as the entity's tentacles burst through the walls, tearing the chamber apart. The ground cracked open. And I could see it, an endless void, a maw that led to nothing but darkness and death, waiting to devour everything. The entity let out a final, ear-splitting shriek as I finished the incantation, its body convulsing, writhing in agony as the words tore through it like knives. The chamber shook violently, the walls crumbling as the entity was pulled back, dragged into the void by the power of the book. I felt the ground give way beneath me, and I fell, plummeting into the darkness as the chamber collapsed around me. The last thing I saw was the entity's eyes, burning with hatred, locked onto mine as it was swallowed by the void, and then, there was nothing. When I awoke, I was lying on the cold, hard ground, the smell of earth and blood still clinging to me. The town was gone, replaced by a desolate wasteland, the sky above a churning mass of dark clouds. I was alone, the only sound the howling wind, carrying with it the faintest echoes of the entity's final scream. I had done it. I had destroyed the town, severed its connection to the entity. But at what cost? The darkness was still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, whispering to me, tempting me with its promises of power. The book in my hand, its pages still warm, still pulsing with that same eerie energy. I knew what it was now, a part of the entity, a piece of its power that I had taken into myself. And I knew that as long as I held on to it, as long as I kept it close, I would never be free of its influence. But I couldn't let it go. Not yet. There was too much I still didn't understand, too much left to discover. I had to know more, had to delve deeper into the darkness, no matter the cost. I had become a part of the horror, just as the town had intended, and now, the real nightmare was just beginning.